Sorry.
All right. I guess we're going live now. Hi, this is Eileen Torres coming to you from Lorain, Ohio with my very special guest tonight, the master musician, Mr. Bobby Sananabria, that I have to confess I've known for many years, but I don't know him that well. And so this is going to be a chat between Bobby and me. And as you're getting to know him, I'm going to be getting to know him even better. Bobby, it seems like I just saw you recently.
Yes, indeed. We had a big concert. I believe it was, when was it? Yeah, Wednesday last week at the Cleveland Art Museum, where I was directing the Roberto Ocasio Latin Jazz mini big band. Roberto Ocasio was a great musician that we went to school together at the Berklee College of Music from the mid to late 70s. He passed away. He was from the Cleveland, Ohio area, and he was a great pianist, band leader, and his dream was to form a Latin jazz camp for high school students and even younger. And before he passed away, he passed the mantle on to his then manager, booking agent, Bev Montai. They did it for 1 year. And then Roberto told her if anything ever happened to him to contact me. And they did. He did. I'm sorry, she did. And I've been the artistic director, artist in residence for the last 15 years. It's been an incredible journey. And it was great last week. We did not have the camp this year because of COVID, and we didn't have it last year because of COVID. But Bev decided to put on a concert in any case because that's how the camp would always end. It was a week-long camp. And on the Friday, there would always be a closing concert with the students in a big band format. So Bev decided to get some former students and get some of the camp faculty and seasoned pros, like the great Jackie Warren on piano, Kip Reed on bass, Paul Ferguson, the musical director of and trombonist, lead trombonist of the Cleveland Jazz Orchestra, Scott McKee, the lead trumpeter of the Cleveland Jazz Orchestra. And we had these incredible young students that had been to the camp, and some of them have gone on to get their degrees in music, like Katie Carson on trumpet, and a few others, Kevin Pace on the congas, Camila Falcone, who's will be coming to the camp next year. She's only 15. Javier Walsh, great young lead alto player. And who was the other person? Nick Edwards on the baritone saxophone, along with Kevin Carson on the guitar, another former student. And as a special guest, we've had this tradition for the last few years, always get a special guest to do the concert with us. We had 10-time Grammy winner, the incredible lead vocalist of the Manhattan Transfer and a good friend of mine, Janice Siegel, was our guest. So it was an amazing event, and you got to dance Mambo on stage, Eileen, and show off some of your incredible skills. Eileen is one of the foremost dance instructors in the United States and the world in terms of the tradition of the Mambo. Dancing the real way should be on too, which is something we could get into maybe sometime later on. But it was great having you on stage, Eileen. And who was your partner? Who was your partner?
He's a New Rican that's been transplanted to Cleveland. His name is Nino Davila, and he's kind of in our mature age group. And when I first saw him, I said, I've got to dance with that guy because he dances naturally. He's a groove dancer. He never loses the beat. He doesn't go wild and crazy. He just lets the music take him away. So I called him, and of course I have to invite his girlfriend Donna. That they dance together all the time, and I thought it would be fun for the audience to see a man dancing with two people, as some of our audience haven't seen that before. But I want to talk a little bit more about the camp because you are so intimately involved in it. I don't think people realize this is the only one in the entire United States that brings together student musicians from grades 8 to 12. Right. And tell us what they do for the week that they are at the camp.
Well, we start with an early morning breakfast, and then from 9 o'clock, about 9:30 on till the evening, about 10 o'clock at night, they're completely immersed in the performance techniques and the history of the Latin jazz continuum, which includes obviously rhythms from Cuba, Brazil, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, etc., etc. So it's a labor of love that Bev should get all the credit for, because she does an incredible job of putting all the logistical pieces together as an administrator. My job is, from an educational standpoint, putting the program together, the pedagogy, so to bring the students from point A to point Z. Many of these students don't have no inkling of what this music and culture is about, even though it's part of the American experience. But most people don't know. Most people don't know, when you listen to a good rock band, a good funk band, a band from New Orleans doing second line, even a heavy metal group, the rhythms of Latin America are in there, in the drum set patterns, in the bass lines, the comping patterns on the guitar, etc., etc. So this is nothing strange. It's an American art form. It was born in 1939 with the Machito Afro-Cubans, and in a small Jewish catering hall on Fifth Avenue and 110th Street, the Park Palace Ballroom, where the Machito Afro-Cubans, this incredible band led by one of my mentors and a gentleman that I played in his band for 10 years, the great Mario Balza. He was boyhood friends with Machito, the singer, and Mario had spent the last 10 years, so to speak, from 1931 up until 1939, when he formed the band with Machito, the great vocalist, playing with the greatest African-American jazz orchestras in New York City at the time: Chick Webb, Noble Sissel's band, Don Redman's band, and finally with Cap Calloway's band, which was the most notable band of that time period. And he brought all that knowledge together with Machito, and they formed this incredible band that fused jazz arranging technique with Afro-Cuban rhythms. Since then, obviously, Latin jazz has expanded to obviously Brazilian rhythms and rhythms from all of the countries in Latin America. So we're in a good time period, but still, the music has yet to get recognition. And it's starting to become part of the educational system in a very minuscule way on the college level and the high school level, simply because what the student meant, we have a growing Latina population in the United States, and they're asking for the music of their countries, but in a jazz context. And plus, it's the most exciting music in the world. I don't have to tell you. So, and you can dance to it, whatever the rhythms are, whether it's cumbia from Colombia, joropo from Venezuela, mambo from Cuba, etc., bomba or plena from Puerto Rico, in all its manifestations. I could keep going. Samba, bossa nova from Brazil. And I'm just naming a couple of rhythms. Yeah, each country in Latin America has literally dozens of rhythms. I would say Colombia alone has, it is said, like over 150 styles of music. So that's just Colombia. But what we do in the camp is to get these kids immersed in the culture, immersed in the music, and they come out of it with a newfound respect for Latino heritage, for Latino culture, the contributions that we've made to this country, and with performance techniques that they've never been exposed to, unless they live in a big city like Chicago or New York or Los Angeles that has a large Latina population. So a kid, say from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or Laredo, Texas, that's never played this kind of music or heard of it before, now all of a sudden, boom, they're immersed in it. And what the great thing is too, that we always devote, when we have the camp, one night where the kids get taken out to not only eat authentic Afro-Caribbean food, but also get to learn how to dance the basic steps of Mambo and Cha-Cha-Cha, which you've been part of the camp in many ways doing that. And it's just a great thing to see these kids who don't come from a culture like we do, like we did, where we learned how to dance as kids.
Right.
And through dance, what do you learn? You learn how to respect your partner on the dance floor. You learn about romance and all that kind of stuff. Because that's what dance represents. But also you learn to have fun and get in touch with the gods that gave us all these rhythms from Western Central Africa that got transformed and evolved to other levels in all of the diaspora in the Caribbean, Central and South America, and of course, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Cleveland, Ohio, Lorraine, etc. Wherever we are, especially Puerto Ricanos, we bring with us the flavor, the music, the food, the dance, the culture, the history, the poetry, the art, and all that in a bag of chips, as we would say in the South Bronx. So that's what our job is. And it's an amazing thing. And I have to mention Bev's name again, because the admin work, the ad hoc work that she's done to keep this alive.
Yes.
For example, the concert we did last week, that was put together just in a couple of weeks, basically
Right.
2 weeks, something like that, which is you'd have to plan months ahead of time. And luckily, my colleague Janice Siegel and friend was available, and she was more than happy to be part of it. And she told me at the end of it, not only did she have fun, but she learned a lot as well. And just to give them a plug, the Manhattan Transfer is recording a new album as we speak, celebrating their 50 years as being the premier jazz, vocal, and pop group. They're in California right now. Janice flew out there from Mexico, where she was on vacation celebrating her birthday. Happy birthday, Janice. She's out there now recording as we speak. So that album is coming out sooner than later. Vince Mendoza is the chief arranger, and they're recording it with a full symphony orchestra, I believe, with a jazz rhythm section. So imagine that.
That the group, I've seen that group all over the country, and it was very interesting for me, who has attended several of these concerts, to see how you adapted her talents. And what I noticed is that you did a lot of Brazilian rhythms for her,
Right.
so that because I was wondering, well, how's Janice going to? I just imagined that she'd be scatting all the time, but you
Right.
were able to bring in the Brazilian rhythms, and then also To Be With You, which took us all back to those,
Oh, yeah.
turn down the light nights.
Yeah. What Eileen is mentioning, a song called To Be With You, which was recorded by the Joe Cuba Sextet in 1962. And it's what we call a bolero in Cuban music. The rhythm is cum king cum, cum king cum. That's what the congas play, and the tapping that I'm doing is what the timbales would play. So what was great about that tune is it's in English. It was written by Willie Torres, and it represents the New York Puerto Rican experience, because we grew up with doo-wop, R&B, etc., as Willie did in the 1950s, growing up in Spanish Harlem at what is known as El Barrio on the east side of New York City. Janice had fallen in love with that song. She recorded, I believe, on her first album as a solo artist. She's done solo projects outside of the Manhattan Transfer. The album's called Experiment and White, and she does it in 4-part harmony. It's beautiful, her version. But listen to the Joe Cuba version, the original version.
Yeah.
You can go to YouTube and A/B them. So that was when you have a guest artist, your job as the musical director and host is to make them feel comfortable. You don't want to put something challenging with something outside of their wheelhouse to make them feel. Obviously, you'd make them feel uncomfortable. It's like it's like what we learn in our culture. When you invite somebody over, you treat them with respect and make them feel at home.
Yes.
So that's what my job is as the musical director. So I picked that tune, arranged it for the band. It was in a mini big band format, 3 saxophones, alto, tenor, baritone sax, 2 trumpets, and a trombone. Where you would have it in a true big band, 5 saxes, 2 alto saxes, 2 tenors, and a bari, 5 saxes, 4 trumpets, and 4 trombones. So we did it in a mini big band format, and it was great. I saw you in the audience smiling as soon as you heard the opening strains.
Oh,
and then Janice loves Brazilian music. She's recorded it over the years. She has a great trio called the Requinche Trio, Requinche is a word in Portuguese that means it means subtlety, nuance. Uh, uh, it means professionalism, class. I mean, it's all of those things. So her knowledge of Brazilian music from a vocal standpoint is really great. So I wanted to make her feel comfortable in that sense. And we also did some music from the jazz, what would be called the jazz standard repertoire.
Right.
When people call something a jazz standard is basically a composition that jazz musicians have adopted and adapted because they like the harmonies, they like the melodies, and they like improvising over it, which is what we do as jazz musicians. And usually those songs come from movies, theater, or popular culture. And that's why we have, and they once the jazz musicians start utilizing it, then it becomes known as a standard, a jazz standard. And part of the tradition of being trained as a jazz musician, becoming a jazz musician, if you have to learn hundreds of songs. And
Because we request them. Yes, we
right,
get so many of them. You brought up a word, and I wanted to touch on this because you didn't mention this about the camp, but this is something that I've seen you do year after year. You teach the kids how to improvise, and I see how they are so afraid to let go. And
right.
by the end of the week, they're doing solos in the concert. How do you accomplish that?
Well, the whole thing is you kind of have to undo the trauma of music education many times because kids, the way they learn music is from a European paradigm. They learn how to read music. They learn about the great composers, Mozart, Beethoven, etc. And in that music, there's no improvisation. Even though Mozart would have been probably, if he was living today, the greatest jazz pianist alive today, because many times he would sit down, improvise something, then he'd write it down. But in our traditions, any African diaspora type of music you're talking about, rock, R&B, funk, salsa, por supuesto, obviously Brazilian tradition, any musical tradition from Latin America, we improvise. Okay, and improvisation is a thing that we all do. Right now, me and you are improvising.
Right.
The basic theme is you're asking me questions, and then I don't know what you're going to ask, and then I
Right.
answer you. So I'm improvising, and you're right now you're thinking of the next question you're going to ask me, etc. So it's a dialogue. So the same thing with improvisation. And in jazz, we learn how to improvise over complex harmonies. Okay, everything has harmony to it. You sing a song like Happy Birthday, there's a harmony to it, and you got to follow that harmony when you make up when you make up an improvisation based off of the melody of Happy Birthday. So kids are not taught that when they learn the standard pedagogy or method in the European classical paradigm. Plus, at the same time, they're taught that the greatest composers are Brahms, Beethoven, Bach, et cetera, et cetera. And that, yeah, they are incredible composers. But we also have people like Duke Ellington, Tito Puente, Mario Balzan, et cetera, et cetera. So, Ticurero Alonso. I mean, it goes on and on. So, our job is to break down that block that they have, and then on top of that, say you have a young student who's shy. Well, you teach them, well, you can express yourself through this horn, through the drums, whatever, through the piano, and nobody's going to put you down for it. In fact, they want to know, hey, let's see how you can, let's see what you can come up with. You dig? So when you see in a cipher young kids doing a rap battle, one rapper against another, that's part of the African diaspora. That's part of our tradition. We do it in Puerto Rico when we have in the mountain countryside controversies where one singer goes against the other, and they have to rhyme in what's called decimas, 10 lines in octosyllabic fashion, and they have to do a pie forzado at the end, what's known as, in English, the forced foot. You have to finish off the story and leave it with something that the other singer can play off of. So improvisation is part. That's just one example. Improvisation is part of our blood. If you're from the African diaspora, doesn't matter what color you are, because it's the culture that matters.
Right.
So it gets manifested in what? Rock. You hear guitar solos in rock. You
Yeah.
hear.
And I want you to give us some examples of clave in rock.
Oh, well, for example, let's go to New Orleans. Let's go to New Orleans, Louisiana. What Eileen is talking about is the clave, which is the rhythmic mantra that we inherited from Western Central Africa. There's 3 notes and 2 notes. So you have the 3 notes, 1, 2, and 3, 4. When I say 2 and, that middle note, that's what we call a syncopation, a note that comes in between the numbers. So that's syncopated. The measure or bar that has just 2 notes, 1, 2, 3, doesn't have any syncopation. It lands on numbers. 1, 2, 3. So you have syncopation, 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or what they would call in down south, shave, hair, cut, 2 bits. Shave, hair, cut, 2 bits. That's clave. So it's a math. You can think of it as a mathematical equation: 3 notes plus 2 notes. So any mathematical equation can be reversed. If instead of starting here with the 3 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, I could start with the 2 notes, and I go on from there. And then, of course, people are looking at this and going, what does that have to do with anything, Bobby? I go, it has a lot to do, because the rhythms of the melody, as the music evolved in the African diaspora, especially in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic, and Haiti, that clave is found in every melody. Any melody that you sing has those 5 beats or notes in there. That's the rhythmic glue that keeps everything together. But is it 3 plus 2 or 2 plus 3? So if I sang to you 1, 2, 3, 4, vamos rumbero que la rumba ya va a empezar. Vamos timbero que la rumba ya va a empezar. And somebody would to ask me as a Latin musician, what is it, Bobby? The melody of Para los Rumberos by Tito Puente. Is it 3 plus 2? Or is it 2 plus 3? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Well, let's try 2 plus 3, see if it fits with the melody. 1, 2, 3, 4. Vamos rumbero que la rumba ya va a empezar. Now, I'm actually physically doing it, but nothing of that pattern is hitting with the rhythms of the melody. Now I'm going to play 3 plus 2 and let's see what happens when I do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Vamos rumbero que la rumba ya va a empezar. So now we know the melody of Para los Rumberos is 3 plus 2. So why is that important? Because the key thing is to maintain the rhythmic integrity of the music. When you sing something out of tune, it's annoying to the average person.
Right.
And you go, oh man, that person sings out of tune. Well, you could be out of rhythm too. And if you're playing 2-3 clave against that Para los Rumberos melody that's really in 3-2 clave, it's annoying as all hell. And it gets to the point where anybody who's knowledgeable about clave will tell you, stop, I can't take it anymore. It's so annoying. So you can have wrong rhythms, just like you can have wrong notes. So
how about an example that our rock and roll fans will understand, like the Young Rascals?
Oh, for example, that old song, Good Lovin'.
Yes.
I'll sing it out. 1, 2, 1, 2. Good lovin', good lovin'. I'm going to ask you, what do you think it is? Is it 3-2 or is it 2-3?
I was feeling so bad. I asked my family doctor just what I had.
Okay.
He said, doctor.
So actually, it's in 2/3. The beginning of the song is 2/3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Good loving, Duncan, good loving, a good loving, good loving. And actually, feel like those guys in the Rascals, the young Rascals, they were listening to salsa at the time. They were from New Jersey, and they would go into New York and go to salsa clubs, and they heard Johnny Pacheco, and they heard Johnny Pacheco's song "Akuyuye," which the melody is this. Which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Good love and good love. They've mentioned that in interviews, etc., that they used to do that all the time. So there goes an influence from Latin music into the world of pop music. If we go to New Orleans, we have all of the second line rhythms that are the parade rhythms of New Orleans, and in the drum patterns played by the snare drum and the bass drum. Okay, you can hear clave in there. For example, there's a rhythm known as Big Four. 1, 2, 3. There's the clave in this in 2, 3. The snare drum patterns. The bass drum is the bass drum answers. So it's in there. Okay. Sometimes it can be in 2/3, sometimes in 3/2, depending on the melody. And when we get into more advanced forms of the representation of clave in the so-called New World, when we get to salsa, it gets really complicated because the arrangers who arrange the music have to know about this rhythmic mantra and how to manipulate it in ways not only to keep the rhythmic integrity of the music happening from a standpoint of the arrangement, what the musicians play that's written on the music, but how do I excite the dancers?
That's right.
And
because our excitement excites you back.
Exactly. So the finest orchestras, if you want to get it, if you're just anybody watching this right now and is getting curious and go, oh wow, I want to hear some of this music. I'm interested now. What the Mambo dancers of the 40s and 50s and early 60s, they named these three orchestras the Big Three: the Machito Afro-Cubans, the Tito Puente Orchestra, and Tito Rodriguez. They were all big bands, but they each had their own character. The Machito Orchestra, they were very known for their fat saxophone sound, okay, and hypnotic type of rhythm. Tito Puente, and of course jazz harmony and arranging technique. Tito Puente, he's a timbalero drummer, excitement, the most exciting Latin band in the history of the music. Tito Puente, how could it not be? A drummer is leading it, and he had the gift also of being a great composer and arranger in his own right. He was a very studied musician, went to the Juilliard School of Music on the GI Bill after World War II when he served proudly in the Navy, went to the Navy School of Music. He played alto saxophone besides drums, timbales, and piano. He had studied piano for 8 years with Victoria Hernandez. Rafael Hernandez is sister. Rafael Hernandez, Puerto Rico's greatest musician. So he was a very school musician, and he had one unique thing about him too. He was a dancer.
All right.
He had studied ballroom dancing when he was a kid. So he had the elements that Machito had, but even more excitement because it's a drummer leading, a percussionist leading the band. And Tito Rodriguez, the tightest band in the history of Latin music. He was a vocalist, but he also was a percussionist. He wouldn't play percussion in the band. He would only do it on certain numbers to show off his skills on the timbales. But he would not allow the timbalero to do a fill unless he okayed it. So, and the band, and you can always tell the tightness of any band, particularly in Latin music, when they do the rhythmic breaks that we call cierres, the rhythmic stop time breaks that are done within the structure of the arrangement. If they're done sloppily, you go, man, the band is under rehearsed, or it's not that good. If they do them on point, then you go, oh man, the band is kicking ass. They know what time it is. And of course, that gets transferred to the dancers, and you guys get excited. And of course, your improvisers too.
Yes.
The man leads, the woman follows. Sometimes in our world, sometimes the man goes, you got it, and you lead. And of course, you're improvising or doing what are known as shines.
Right.
And you get to improvise too.
You gotta let us go at some point and do our own thing, because we may be feeling it a little bit differently than our partner is.
Right. Exactly. And would you exhibited the center of activity for that was from 1948 till 1966 was the Palladium Ballroom in New York City, the home of the Mambo. It was on West 53rd Street and Broadway. The greatest orchestras, the three I mentioned, and others performed there, and the greatest dancers performed there. And it was the place where integration started, really, in this country. It was happening a little bit at the Savoy Ballroom uptown, the great black dance halls. But they were mostly, Italians, Jews going there, some Irish, to dance with people from the African American community. At the Palladium, it was blacks, whites, and all forms of Latino, mostly Puerto Rican, Asians as well. And they even had a corner or space at the Palladium, as I've been told by the old Mambo Nicks of the era, that people who were gay could dance and nobody would bother them. Nobody would say, hey, get the hell out of here or whatever. So tolerance, integration started really at that ballroom. And why? Because the music was so exciting, so powerful. So another example of Latin American culture being part of American history. In this case, you have to say the truth. We were part of the civil rights movement, but in our own big way musically. I'm sure the people at the Palladium didn't realize they were doing that.
And it was even before the civil rights movement really raised its head that people came together that wouldn't normally mingle, just for the sheer joy of hearing the music and dancing together. And if I'm not mistaken, Tito Puente said that the Palladium was the first instance of voluntary desegregation. I read that in one of the books.
Well, he's very right. He's very right. I mean, if somebody from down south at that time in the 1950s came to the Palladium Ballroom, they'd be in total shock. total shock. But what I think would happen with that same person that maybe was raised as a racist, after about half an hour, they'd be going, man, this music is really hip. If it was a man, these women are beautiful. If it was a woman, man, these men are handsome, and wow, they're so smooth on the dance floor. I'd like to learn. So the great thing about the Palladium was an hour before the bands would come on, they'd have a dance instructor giving a basic mambo and cha-cha lesson so that you could participate.
Right.
So the most famous person was Joe Pirro, who was Italian American, Killer Joe. They called him Killer Joe Pirro. And he taught. Cuban Pete, Pedro Aguilar also taught. He was Puerto Rican, but he took that nom de plume, Cuban Pete. Millie Donay, another great dancer. She was, I believe, Italian. Yeah, Italian American, yeah. And Cuban Pete's partner. I got to dance with her once. I had the privilege of dancing cha-cha-cha with her once. Yeah.
You know what I've always wanted to know is what drew you to drums and percussion? Was that what you first said, okay, this is what I'm going to do? Or did you hear something? Or did you start with another instrument? How did that evolution begin?
Well, it started in my neighborhood in the South Bronx, where I was born in 1957, which is the year West Side Story premiered on Broadway. So, and Sputnik, the first Russian
satellite,
the first satellite. Oh, right. So it was a good year. I always say it was a good year. So, At that time, Mambo was at its height. Rock and roll was ascending and taking over. January 1st, 1959, Castro takes over Cuba, and that was the beginning of the end. So the Puerto Rican community in New York took over the reins of Cuban music, kept it alive. We have to be given full credit for that, because without us, there'd be no salsa today.
You guys picked up the ball and ran with it. The Cubans developed it. They brought it to New York. They got, everybody involved at the highest level. And then with the embargo and no interaction, there could be, no more records were being sold, across the whatever that part of the Atlantic is. And so the Puerto Ricans are the ones that really took it over, ran with it, and developed it to what it is today, making New York the salsa capital of the world that it was for such a long time. And we could talk about whether or not that characteristic or that title still belongs to New York. But tell us about your...
To finish up the story real quick, and I'm editing here. I grew up in a time period in New York City, particularly in the South Bronx where I grew up, when you hear conga drums in the park. It was not a strange. Here, I got some conga drums here. It was not. It was not strange.
You heard.
It was not strange to hear this at night in the summertime. You'd hear that at night, and how could you not be affected by that?
And so is that the first drum that you began learning?
Yeah, I learned by watching the street drummers playing. And it's very similar to street drummers in Cuba playing rumba. What I just played for you was known as Havana style guaguancó, that melody. Man, you would hear that at night. Nobody complained. In fact, people would call up the local precinct and say, if you didn't hear that, that's the difference between our neighborhoods and gentrified neighborhoods, But in any case, hearing that, salsa was at its high point. It was the music of the masses. You heard it in every bodega in New York City, coming out of speakers, etc. There were more nightclubs, dance halls, or there were either equal or more nightclubs and dance halls in the Bronx at one time than in Manhattan. And then the great dance halls in Manhattan, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was just an amazing thing. Everybody was into the music. African and American brothers and sisters were into the music. Our Jewish brothers and sisters were into it. Our Italian brothers and sisters were into it. Irish, everybody that heard that music. And of course, dance was part of our upbringing. We were the last generation to experience that. In fact, if you didn't learn how to dance or participate, you probably never go out on a date and never get married. Such
a valuable social skill.
Yeah, and it's people do not understand. I look at young people today. I go, man, what these young people have missed out on, et cetera, et cetera. So the social graces that we talked about before, just a man opening the door for a young lady when she steps out of a car, or opening the door for her when she enters the room. I was taught, as we were all taught, when a woman enters the room, you stand up. I learned that the hard way when I was a little kid. My grandmother on my father's side visited from Puerto Rico. They picked her up from the airport. I'm in the kitchen. No, I'm sorry. I'm in the living room sitting watching TV. They walk in, and my father goes, "Está aquí tu abuela, your grandmother's here." And I didn't stand up. All of a sudden, my mother comes over, pow, right in the head, and she goes, "When a woman walks into the room, stand up. Any woman, even your sister, So what do you learn? You learn that women are supposed to be cherished, respected, etc. I mean, that's a hard way to learn it, but you never forget it. So you learn these. This is all part and parcel of being a mature young person going into adulthood, and dance just reinforced all of that. So when I would watch these people playing rumba in the park, etc., and then find the rubric, and I would, at the same time, I'm watching great jazz artists on TV like the Ed Sullivan Show, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, all the great TV shows had jazz orchestras playing
Yeah,
them.
Irv Griffin,
Right.
Mike Douglas, all of them.
You see Sammy Davis Jr. performing on the Merv Griffin show, and he's telling the audience, "I'm blind, I'm half Puerto Rican, I'm black," and he's telling, and you're looking, wow, he's half Puerto Rican, this, that, and the other, and you're going, wow, he's one of us. And then he sings, and you're going, wow. Then he dances, then he plays music. You're going, wow. How could you not be affected by that? That's excellence on an incredible level. Even the rock bands that performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, they had to perform live. They didn't fake it or anything like that. So you're seeing musical excellence. Plus, you're growing up with R&B, funk, rock.
Right.
You're growing up with the African American community alongside as brothers and sisters. And that's the difference between a New Yorican and somebody from the island. We grew up with African American culture, so that's part of our ethos, part of our being, the way we speak, the way we walk, the way we talk, etc. And it all started coming together in the mid '60s with what became known as Latin Boogaloo, which was a combination of R&B with cha-cha-cha, Guajira from Cuba, Son Montuno. If you want to know what Latin Boogaloo is, just go to YouTube and listen to Mongo Santa Maria's version of Watermelon Man, and you'll learn what Latin Boogaloo is right away. So I was affected by all that, but I was affected by the Beatles, all of that kind of stuff. But I was affected by two things, especially the power and majesty of the trumpet and the drums. And I gravitated more to the drums because you could play on the cars, the metal cars. I used to practice congas. I'd be on a car like this, practicing everything was made out of metal until somebody starts yelling, "Hey, you little mother flower!" the car, Meanwhile, somebody's tapping out a rhythm with their comb, etc. If you want to get a little taste of that, I would suggest everybody go to YouTube and check out a documentary called "From Mambo to Hip Hop," and you'll get to see what that life was about. I'm in it as a talking head, and I was a consultant. That was shown on PBS back in 2006, and the film still holds up. You'll get to see a lot of great archival footage. But that's what I grew up in that milieu. But the difference with me was that besides the Latin music that I fell in love with, I fell in love with jazz at the same time. So how could I express myself as a drummer in jazz, where the conga, if it was used in jazz, it was added on. It wasn't an essential part of the rhythm section. But if I was a drummer, then I could be always called upon to be part of any group. So I started off learning by myself, just self-taught by watching, etc., asking questions. And then finally, when I was in high school, I had a great music teacher, Mr. William Ryan, who encouraged me, supported me, and got me prepared for the audition to the Berklee College of Music. And I went to the Berklee College of Music from 75 to 79. I was the first Puerto Rican there. I know.
Were you reading music before you auditioned?
Yes, but not to the level that a real true professional. I was reading at the level of, like, say, a first or second grader with those books, See John Run and all that stuff. That is reading, but it's not in musical terms, that's not the level that you want. You want to be able to read like you're reading the New York Times without having to look up a word, So
how were you? Was your raw talent so extraordinary that you passed the audition, or was it a combination of your past experience with the little bit of reading that you did and what you selected to do? What was it that
it was all of those things. It was all of those things. It was all of those things combined. And the main thing that I tell everybody is desire. There was no way that I was not going to get into that freaking school and pursue my dream. Because if I would have stayed in New York City, in the South Bronx at that time, this is the height of the fires, the malfeasance that the city was imposing on the city and its citizens. I mean, it was a time period where you had to literally always look behind your back every 2 or 3 seconds because you didn't know if a junkie was going to jump out of the shadows and mug you because they needed money for a fix, or somebody else was going to mug you from a street gang or whatever. So music in many ways saved my life and my determination and persistence, and that hard-nosed attitude that I inherited from both my parents and also just growing up in the South Bronx. But I must say that besides Mr. Ryan, my father was one of my greatest teachers because he had he was an avid record collector, and he listened to music from all over the world.
Okay.
I mean, we listened to Mexican rancheras, which let me tell you something, it's not as far-fetched. Was a Puerto Rican in New York listening to Mexican rancheras? Because Puerto Ricans in New York went to the Spanish language movie theaters, and what did they see?
The
Mexican
Hollywood,
movie. Yeah.
the Hollywood of Latin America was Mexico City.
Right. So we saw those, and that's why Leonard Bernstein, in the song America on the Rooftop, he does it as a wapango. And that rhythm.
Yes.
1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 that. So that rhythm, some people tell me sometimes, hey, especially Puerto Ricans from the island, they go, ¿Eso, ¿qué es eso? Música mexicana con los puertorriqueños ahí in West Side Story. Hey, what is that? Mexican music with the Puerto Ricans in West Side Story on the rooftop. I go, you don't understand because you don't understand the New Yorican experience, man. We grew up with that because those are the movies we saw when you went to the Spanish language movie theater. I knew about Cantinflas when I was a little kid. I didn't know why everybody was laughing at him, but I saw him. We had to. Our parents brought us along. And everybody that's older than us that are adults are laughing their butts off. I go, I don't understand what's so funny about the dude. Of course, later on, then I did. But that's the ignorance of youth. But these are all cultural markers for the New Yorican experience. And of course, you have groups like Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. Two of the guys in Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers were Puerto Rican.
Right.
So people don't know that. That's part of our experience. If you grow up on the island, you don't know any of that. And of course, we developed hip hop and the dance moves in hip hop. I would say 90% of the hip hop dance moves in early hip hop were developed by young New Yorkers.
Well, look at Question Mark and the Mysterians and Cannibal and the Hunters.
Right.
Right.
That's the Chicano. That's the Chicano side of things from the West.
Well, yeah, that was going on the West Coast. But I want to know if your experience at Berkeley led you to become the educator that you are now, because you tell us all the schools that you are involved with, where your faculty. I mean, you are teaching when you come here to the camp every year, but you have so many credentials. So many musical credentials in the education department where you're teaching at so many schools. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's really not that many, but they are important. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have taught all over the world as an invited clinician speaker. And the impetus for that, the beginning of that, was really as a young person, particularly at Berkeley, people not understanding our culture and making fun of it. Okay, to the degree that one gets pissed off because God, these people don't have any respect for us. They don't even know we exist. I remember my first roommate in college. He's looking through my albums. What is this? Machero? What is this? Tito Puente? Who is it? What is this? What is this? Typica? He's going Typica 7-3. What is this? There's a guy with a violin on the cover. This violin in Latin music, like they're just making fun of the things. So I would, in my own way, in my own primitive way at the time, because I was just learning myself, explain to them, no, this is Afro-Cuban based music. This is comes from Cuba, but why you're Puerto Rican? What, you know? Then I have to explain that, you know. So I want you to listen, you know, and they would listen, and they would go, wow, those rhythms are complicated. You know, what, I go, do you like it? I go, yeah, it's exciting. But they would always relate it to Santana. At least Santana gave me an opening to relate to them. You've heard of Santana, right? Well, check out, this is Oye Como Va, Santana's version. Now listen to the composer who wrote it in 1962, interpreting it with his big band. And they would go, wow, there's a violin in there. Wow, what's that? I hear like a flute in there or whatever. You know, you explain to them and etc. So I became like a cultural advocate for the music and everything else while I was at school, and that carried over into everything. And then, of course, I was very fortunate that I led a band in high school that I called Ascensión, which I started it when I was in high school, and it still exists till this day. But as my musical knowledge increased in college, the sophistication level musically of what I was doing with that band increased, and we became very well known around Boston. And then I was asked sometimes to be on radio interviews, etc. And so I was thrust into being into the position of being an advocate for the music. And I always realized that whatever I do, in any situation that I'm in, whether I'm in the situation of being a performer, a lecturer, a teacher, whatever, that I have to do it at the highest level possible and with dignity, because not only do I represent the Puerto Rican community, but I represent all Latinos.
Yes.
I don't want anybody telling me, oh, those Latinos, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know anything about, you know, this, that, and the other. It's like somebody asked me one time, what have you Puerto Ricans done for New York City besides that parade that you guys do every year?
Oh boy.
That was the wrong thing to ask me. After about half an hour, the guy goes, oh man, I'm so sorry, man. Please stop. Wait a minute, man. Let me tell you more. You know, like this, that, and the other. So the Puerto Rican community in New York City has never gotten the credit, but we transformed the city through our music, our culture, our dance, our theater, our politics, our education, our love for education, our love for family, our love for family, our food. I mean, in everything. Bilingual education exists in New York because of the Puerto Rican community and the rest of the United States. Because of a kid learning Mandarin and Cantonese in Chinatown, besides English, has us to thank for that. Because we fought for that. We went through the legal process, the whole thing, fought. But so I always tell people, listen, if you meet anybody who's Puerto Rican of a certain age, just, you know, shake their hand and go, hey, man, thank you. Thank you for what you've done for the city. And I'm serious about that. But to make a long story short, once I graduated from Berkeley, and I would come back to New York every summer. So I was still active, you know, going back and forth. I got the gig with Mongo Santamaria, famous conga drummer. And the rest is history. I've gotten to play with every major figure in this music and record with them. So I'm blessed. But always, I've had my own groups. Like I had the Cuarteto H, it's a quartet. I have Sexteto Ibiano, sextet. I have Ascensión, it's a nonet, tentet. And I have the 21-piece multiverse big band. We've been fortunate. All our albums have been nominated for Grammys. And then I've done solo lecture concerts, just me on drums and percussion. So I'm very grateful, very grateful. Which is another thing I tell people in my master classes. Basically, you just got to remember two phrases: "I love you" and "thank you." And the other one comes into play when you really are being disrespected and or whatever, and your culture is being disrespected. But I won't repeat that.
I can guess.
Yeah.
I can guess. So, but you are affiliated with schools.
Oh, yes, I'm affiliated with the. I taught for. It's funny. I taught at my alma mater, the Berklee College of Music, for about a year. while I was teaching at the Manhattan School of Music, I taught at the Manhattan School of Music for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then about 3 years ago, I left there to start teaching at NYU, which I'm there. And also at the new school, I've been teaching there for about 27, 28 years.
And
So,
you said it's not much. It's a lot. Many
well,
years, many prestigious institutions. And what I love about every time I've ever seen you perform, you leave us with a greater appreciation because you tell us the historical facts of how this developed and who was part of it and why it's relevant to you. So not only do people leave your concerts feeling fulfilled with the music, but they also leave with greater knowledge and appreciation for what they just experienced.
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, that comes from the disrespect I've experienced over the years occasionally. And it's funny because when I first started working with Mario Bauza, who's considered the father of Afro-Cuban jazz, he was the musical director and founder of the Machito Afro-Cubans. I asked him, what, Mario, ¿por qué tú formaste la orquesta? What was the impetus for you forming the orchestra? He looked me straight in the eye and told me in Spanish, you know what it was? When I was in the Cab Calloway band, the guys in the band asked me one time, hey, Mario, what's the music of your country like? Cuba. So he takes out some 78s and he plays the music in the song tradition, which is the mother form that led to salsa. Song means folk song in Cuban music. It developed in Eastern Cuba. It's the mother of what we call salsa today. So he plays them a recording and they hear guitar. They hear the Cuban mandolin-like instrument, the tres, which is a guitar with 3 sets of double strings. They hear bongo. They hear a lone trumpet or 2 trumpets. They hear a singer in Spanish. And they started laughing, making fun of the music. And they started saying, telling him, hey, man, what is that? Hillbilly music? Whatever. And he got mad. And he goes, yeah, it's country music from my country, my homeland, Cuba. Of course, you got these sophisticated jazz musicians, and in their ignorance, they were just making. Usually, what happens when somebody doesn't know about something, they make fun of it. They make a sarcastic remark or whatever. It's very interesting the way human nature is. It's like a defense mechanism. Mm-hmm. The mature thing would be, wow, that's interesting. What's that instrument?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a mandolin? No, it's what we call a tres. You know, what are those drums? Those are bongos. What are those shakers? Oh, those are maracas. You know, so they insulted him, and then he said, you know what? There's going to be an orchestra one day, just like this one, the Cab Calloway Orchestra, dressed all refined, nice, and everything, and it's going to be able to play jazz, but it's all going to have a Afro-Cuban percussion section, and we'll be able to play the music from my country, but in this kind of format, a big band, with sophisticated arrangement. That's why he formed the orchestra. So in my case, light bulb went on. I go, wow, man, that's just like me. I'm sick and tired of people making fun of my culture. They're not even interested in learning a lot of times. So that was the beginning. That all started happening at Berkeley. Oddly enough, it didn't happen in New York City. You know why? Because Italians, Jews, Irish, they knew about us, about Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominican. They listened to the music.
Right.
And they danced to the music. No matter, even if they didn't dig us, they would go to the dances. And I go, you know what? I hate these people.
Right.
But the women are beautiful, man. I'm going to go ask that young lady to dance with me. So the music
is compelling. It's compelling. You have to move. When did you move from congas to the drum set? Because
I never abandoned playing congas. I still get called occasionally to do recording sessions as a percussionist. And when I was at Berkeley, everybody was calling me to play percussion because nobody knew how to play those instruments. And in my freshman year, I was very fortunate because the composer in residence at the school, Michael Gibbs, very famous composer and arranger. He did the arrangements for John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra with the London Symphony. He was the composer in residence at the school. So he had an orchestra at the school. It rehearsed in E1. I always remember E1 means Ensemble Room 1 every Monday evening, and was made up of faculty members and the best students. So they got me because he wanted a hand drummer, somebody could play percussion, because he had seen Weather Report. At that time, Alex Acuna was playing drum set from who was Peruvian but lived in Puerto Rico, and Manolo Badrena was the percussionist, the hand drummer. He had seen that, and there was a trend of a lot of jazz rock artists at the time using percussion, Miles Davis, others. So he wanted that element in the band, and he got me. And it was great for me because I was thrust in with all these heavy musicians. But in that ensemble, everybody knew that was the best ensemble at the school. That was the A-list ensemble. If you were in that band, that meant you were a bad mother flower.
Right.
So here I am, a kid from the projects in the South Bronx, playing congas, timbales, bongo, Brazilian percussion. And I had taught myself about Brazilian percussion by watching great artists and listening and asking, like we all do. We learn by osmosis. So that band did all these complex arrangements. Like, for example, most music is in 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, or if it deviates from that, it could be in what we call waltz time, 3/4 time, 1, 2, 3, 1. But here, Michael Gibbs was writing music, a bar of 7, a bar of 5, and a bar of 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh my God.
And he would say, Roberto, can you come up with a groove for that? And I said, sure, I could do it. Because I had been a fan of Don Ellis, this great trumpeter. That's what we call odd meters. Those are what we call odd meters. They're out of their, or they used to call them novelty meters. They're outside of the norm of what you would normally hear in popular music. So those kind of meters are used in East India, Bulgaria, and Greece. These cultures that for them, I think it's called Hasapa Servico. It's in 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And how did you know about that?
Because New York City.
To that part of the world.
Because New York City. New York City. You go to a wedding. The person getting married is the guy's Greek. The girl is Mexican. So they had to get a band to play Greek music and also some Latin music of some kind or whatever, even if it was not interpreted authentically or that great. But we have these cultural enclaves in New York, and you just go and wow, I mean, I saw and heard so many different kinds of music when I was a kid growing up that I didn't know it at the time how lucky I was, because at the same time the city is caving in with the fires, but at the same time I'm learning about all of these things. And because of my talent, my talent was that I could learn fast, and my heart was open to all of that. Instead of saying esa música griega, pa carajo, that music is Greek, what am I, forget about that. I would be like, wow, how does a drummer play, what is he doing, let me figure out what he's trying to do, or what he is doing or she's doing. So when he asked me to do that, I remembered, Don Ellis, and I had some of his albums, because Don Ellis was a trumpeter. He had played in Latin bands in LA, but he was also ethnomusicologist, and he studied the music of East India, Bulgaria, Greece, all these countries, Brazil. So his big band did those kind of things, and he was one of my heroes. If you want to check him out, there's many videos of him on YouTube, but You could check him out. He even got mainstream notoriety because he did the music for what? That famous movie, The French Connection.
Oh.
Right? And also the Seven Ups. But he died young. He died, I think he was 42 or 44 years old. Died young. But he was a genius. And I knew about him, and I knew that he did those kind of things. So when I was in that band, I go, oh, wow, I can do this. I know what it's about. Yes, and of course, it's like ghetto celebrity status in the hood. Somebody sees you got a talent. Yo, there goes the kid Sanabria. He plays timbales, congas, etc. Hey, and people would see me. I'm 14 years old in the snow with a timbale case going to a gig. And those were the days when nobody canceled gigs in nightclubs. And I'm getting on the subway. I'm brushing off the snow, carrying a cymbal bag, a stick bag, and timbales, and I'm going like that. Everybody knew me in the neighborhood because of that. Oh, el hijo de Juanita, el músico, that kind of a thing. And plus, in my building, who lived in my building? There was a guy named Candido Rodriguez. He was the timbala player for Ricardo Rey and Bobby Cruz, Richie Ray and Bobby Cruz, who had the hottest salsa band at the time. And his wife did my mother's hair. So he was a local hero living in the building. He was a timbalero. He had a hit back then. Soy mezcla, soy blanco y moreno. Y porque soy moreno, la jevita me encuentra muy bueno. I'm mixed. I'm black and I'm white. And because I'm black and I'm white, all the chicks dig me. He had a big afro, and then also a few buildings down in the projects, in the Melrose projects where I grew up, Caco, who was the timbala player for the Alegre All-Stars, lived. And I used to play stickball with his nephews.
Wow.
And one time his nephews, they go to me, hey, you want to see my uncle's suits? So I go, yeah. So they had the key to the apartment. So they open up the closet and I see like 30 different suits. Beautiful, like sharkskin suits in canary yellow, aqua blue. Ridiculous, pink, So all of a sudden, I'm going, wow, we're little kids, 10 years old. So all of a sudden the door opens and it's Caco, Francisco Bastard, who was a legend of the Latin music scene. We go, oh, and the way Caco talked, he was really dark, black Puerto Rican, and he had a papazo, which was straightened out hair. Ruth Sanchez used to do his hair, and she's friends with me. I didn't know her at the time, but she used to do his hair and also Al Sharpton's hair. Straighten it out. And she did it for Diana Ross, for everybody. Boricua, she's Puerto Rican. But I didn't know that at that time. But anyway, he comes in with his big papazo and everything. And the way Caco used to talk, you couldn't understand him in English or Spanish. Because he talked like this. Oye, ¿qué lo estás haciendo ahí? Oye, coño. Like that, So we got scared, we froze, and he goes, oh, he's like, look at that. And he looks at you're looking at my suits. Huh? You like them? And I go, yeah. And I'm scared, He goes, put one on. and I go, what? He goes, pick one. And put on the jacket, like. Then he makes his nephews do the same thing. And of course, the jacket is too big, arms. It was hilarious. And he took a Polaroid of us, and he's laughing. He goes, "Get out of here!" So somewhere in the annals of history, Caco, he's no longer with us, but there's a picture of us. The 3 kids with some of Caco's jackets on. But things like that would happen all the time. The environment that I grew up with, I'm telling you, Eileen, I was so freaking lucky. But because besides looking over my shoulder all the time, I had all these incredible experiences. Like, for example, on the corner bodega on East 153rd Street, I grew up in 681 Cortland Avenue, that building on the corner, that big high-rise project. Across the street was the bodega. So I don't know if this is a thing in Lorraine or any of the Puerto Rican communities in Cleveland, but if you didn't have the money to pay the bill, the bodega owner would take out like one of those composition notebooks
Oh
that
yeah.
every kid knows, and he'd have your family's name in there, and he'd write down what you owed,
Right.
la cuenta.
Right.
So, my mother goes, get some cheese, media libra de queso amarillo, get a half pound of American cheese, a ham, this, that, get a container of milk. So he would, and she'd give me like half the money, pay him this, and he'll write down and tell me what we owe,
Right.
And it was the honor system,
Right.
which was a cool thing, man. So, and that was not just for the Puerto Rican festival, the black families, the few whites that were still living in the neighborhood. There were whites living in the projects, believe it or not, still. Remember the Graziano family, they were all Italian.
Well, there's poor people everywhere, right?
Yeah, there you go. We're all united by one common thing.
Yeah.
So right next to it was a black barber shop. So I'm 6 years old, and the black barber shop kept the door open in the winter, in the summertime, because there's no air conditioning, just fans. There were two barbers with 3 chairs. I walk by, I look inside, I'm 6 years old, and there's a black barber and there's a white guy in the chair. I go, what's a white guy doing there? And I noticed the guy's rubbing some chemical thing in the guy's hair. It's hair straightener. I think it was called Dixie Peach or something like that. It was made out of lye, and you could smell it. It was a white guy that had curly hair, and he needed to get his hair straightened. So the barber looks at me. The other barber's in the chair with the newspaper, and the barber looks at me, and I'm like this with my mouth open in wonderment. And the barber looks at me and goes, what's the matter, young man? You never seen a white boy get his hair conked before? He's got concholine, that's what it is. Concholine, getting his hair straightened. So that he looks clean and mean, and streamlined, So those are the kind of experiences I had growing up, and they were great for me because I saw the commonalities that we all had. And what you just said, there's poor people all over the world. That brings us together. And I don't know how far Lorraine is from Chicago, but that's
5 hours, 5-hour drive.
Yeah, so it's close. So that's what Fred Hampton was about, bringing everybody together from the Black Panthers. Unfortunately, the government wasn't down with that, but that spirit still lives on in me, and it lives on in you. And especially with us, we use the music to bring people together, and that's what it's all about.
Well, we're going to be having to wrap up soon, but there's 2 things that I do want to mention first. And one has to do with, my Ohio connection, and the other one with my DC connection.
Right.
And the first one was Dennis Kucinich, who used to be the mayor of Cleveland, who was the congressman who read your name into the congressional record. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, that was a great honor. I mean, I have it somewhere around here. Oh, here it is. Here. Let me see if I can get it without knocking anything over. Yeah. Here it is. Yeah. This is it. In case anybody's thinking, he's lying or she's lying.
Proof.
Yeah, there it is.
Yes.
They ask you for your license and registration when they stop you. I should carry this around,
So you got your name read into the congressional record as a music educator. That is a huge honor, and that's another Ohio connection. He was first, the youngest mayor in the United States, and he was mayor of Cleveland, who went on to become a member of the House of Representatives. And then the other one is the Congressional Black Caucus. I lived in DC for 28 years, which was where I first met you. Right. Honored him as a musician and as an educator. So you were also recognized by the Black Caucus within the House of Representatives. How did that come about?
That came about because I play with this incredible percussion ensemble called M-Boom. And it was founded and led by the legendary drummer Max Roach. who has a connection to the Manhattan School of Music because I believe in 1955 he graduated there with his degree in composition, musical composition. So when he passed away, Joe Chambers, who was a member of the ensemble, took over. And the group is made up of some of the finest drummer percussionists in the world. And we play a variety, over 100 instruments on stage, everything from gongs to European classical timpani to vibes, marimba, glockenspiel, you name it, we play it, snare drums, drum set, everything. So one of them, there were two Latino members in it, Ray Mantilla from the South Bronx, who was of Peruvian, Puerto Rican descent, and the ultimate hip guy, because the way Ray spoke, I used to crack up because he just recently passed away as well during COVID. May he be resting in peace and power. Hey, what's happening, baby? Like that. That's the way he talked. Hey, Eileen, you're looking good out there. Yeah, So that's the way he spoke, and he was boyhood friends with Ray Barretto. They grew up together. They both gave each other gigs, etc. So when Ray Barretto left Herbie Mann, he gave the gig to Ray Mantilla, and that's how Ray got in the jazz world, etc. But anyway, then the other Hispanic gentleman that was in the band was Steve Berrios in this percussion group. So when Steve unfortunately passed away, it's been 10 years this year. They asked me, and I was like flabbergasted. I was like, they asked me to take Steve's place.
Wow.
You know what an honor that is? Like you have the greatest drummer percussionist in the world, Joe Chambers, Warren Smith, Eli Fontaine. I mean, it was ridiculous. And then Ray Mantilla, they asked me to be part of it. I go, what? And in that group, I've played everything from vibes to marimba to drum set, timpani. I mean, all that musical training that I've had and that street knowledge that I have, I bring to the table. So when we were invited by the Congressional Black Caucus to perform in Washington, D.C., and I think you were there, they all surprised us by giving us each individually those awards, and they announced our names and the whole thing. And I was like flabbergasted. These are feathers in my cap that I'm really proud of. Another feather in my cap is that we've played at the Apollo Theater with my Multiverse Big Band several times, headlining.
Wow.
At the Apollo. So that is the center of Black culture in the multiverse. And for me to be asked to perform there, not just once, but several times, it's amazing. I performed there just in a performance capacity and also in an educational capacity. The last time I performed there was for this NPR show called Code Switch. And I have to thank somebody who's a mutual friend of ours, Felix Contreras, from NPR Alt Latino.
Mm-hmm.
Code Switch is a program hosted by two people. One is Persian Puerto Rican, I forgot her name, and an African American gentleman, and they talk about topics related to the diaspora experience, whether it's Black Lives Matter or music. So occasionally they've done live theater broadcasts. So they did one from the Apollo.
Wow.
And they had a comedian. They had a comedian who's on HBO, African American woman from that show Blackish. I think it's called not Blackish. Is it Blackish? Anyway, she's well known. And then they had a poet. Then they had Samuel. I forgot his last name. The great restaurateur, who's from Ethiopia, but he was raised in Europe. And they had him on. And instead of having a band, Felix recommended me. They called me up and they go, "What do you want me to do?" And they go, "You're going to be on stage and you're going to be like bringing on the people when they are announced." I go, "Yeah, but so you want one of my bands?" No, just you on drums. And I go, "Okay, So I'll can I play percussion too?" So I set up a whole kit with drums, and congas. So I could play simultaneously, and you could hear that episode. Just look up Code Switch goes to the Apollo, and you
I
can check it
put a
out.
note down already.
Yeah, so I'm basically doing what the Tonight Show Orchestra used to do for the Johnny Carson show, bringing on the guests, but I'm doing it all by myself, and it was great. It was so much fun and etc. So, and when I go to the Apollo, for me, it's very heartfelt because they give me mad love, mad respect. I walk in, it's Maestro, what's happening, brother? Like
Wow.
that kind
Wow.
of thing. So I always remembered how much the African American community loved Tito Puente. They loved him. I'm talking about my man, my brother, you know. Why? Because Tito was born and raised in Harlem, in Spanish Harlem on the east side. So he used to always say in his interviews, "Where are you from, Maestro Puente?" Then he go, without dropping a beat, Harlem in New York City. And they gave him so much love, and they gave it to me. So I'm very much grateful to that community. And yo siempre lo pongo en nivel más alto. I always put them at the highest level because from them came all the rhythms that we use today.
Well, Bobby, we could talk probably for a week with all your experience, with all your knowledge. I just want to leave the listeners knowing that you have been named Jazz Percussionist of the Year multiple times. You've been recognized by Jazz Magazine and Jazz Journalist, and just about everyone who has an ear for music, who has a love for the culture and the music that comes from it. And I personally want to thank you for really carrying that forward, for having that as one of your focal points when you are performing, to really give the proper respect to where the music came from and who the music makers were. And you are one of those music makers. And on behalf of everyone who's watching, everyone who's ever heard you, seen you, interacted with you, thank you for everything that you bring into our lives in the past, the present, and what you're going to do. We don't know yet.
I'll tell you right now.
Right.
Real quick. Less
Okay.
than 20 seconds. We have the Bronx Music Heritage Center that I've been running along with Elena Martinez for the last 9 years. That beautiful art gallery space. But now we're moving to the forthcoming Bronx Music Hall, a beautiful 250-seat theater in the South Bronx with an outdoor amphitheater that we're already utilizing. So that's the Bronx Music Hall. So we'll be opening hopefully in September, October. Everything was delayed because of COVID, but that theater is going to be open. It'll also, the seats are retractable. We could have 500 people standing in it. We're going to bring back dancing to the Bronx with the greatest orchestras and all the educational things that we've talked about, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something to really, really look forward to. And also listen to my radio show on Friday nights, WBGO, the Latin Jazz Cruise, 9 to 11 Eastern Time. You can listen very easily wherever you are in the world by going to WB as in Bobby, G as in God, O.org on your computer. So we'll see you on the radio. And you can listen to last week's show by typing in WBGO Latin Jazz Cruise, Cruise, in your search window right now. Thank you so much, Eileen. Thank you to the Puerto Rican diaspora. And thank you for keeping it 100 as always. And I'm telling you, if you haven't seen Eileen dance, you're missing out. So I'm sure there's some videos of you on YouTube.
Well, let me just say to everyone who's out there that's a dancer, I'm a good dancer. I'm not a great dancer. I'm a groove dancer. I just respond to the music. I don't do a lot of fancy stuff. I'm a very good teacher because I know how to break it down, but I am not a fabulous dancer. I'm a very good dancer, and
I'll be the judge of that.
Okay. and you've got some fans that are, sending their love and respect to you, and believe it or not, some of them are dancers. They're known in the world of dance, but they have love and respect for you. So once again, Bobby, until we meet again, who knows when that's going to be? Certainly next summer, but our paths will cross again.
Most definitely. And if you're in New York, and this is going to be archived, but if you're in New York on the 29th, which is Thursday, I'll be performing at the Worldwide Plaza with Ascension, my 10tet It's between 49th and 50th Street. It's a beautiful plaza between two high rises. Outdoors, we'll be performing there from 5:30 till 7:30 in a concert setting. But for those of you who are dancers, fear not, because even though I'm a jazz guy, we always play something for the dancers because I dance too. So it's very important that we never lose touch with that aspect of our culture. So those of you who are out there that have kids, if you don't know how to dance, it doesn't matter. Go find somebody like Eileen to teach you, and then they can teach your kids as well. Because that way, one of these days, you'll come up to me on the bandstand, and you'll go to me, Mr. Sanabria, can you play something for us to dance? And I go, oh, of course. I thought you never would ask. So there you go. Bye,
All
everybody.
right. Good night, everyone. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Good night.